Okay, this is going to target, well, hello again, by the way. And thank you for coming a little early today. I'd like to talk about something that will be in the exam. And this is not yet on the Moodle website. I will put it on the Moodle website today. I decided to cover this today. And then once we're done with this, we're going to start with ideas and war. So we're going to start with ideologies such as militarism, cult of the offensive, and social Darwinism. And your reading is Stephen Vanevera. So for the next time that I see you, finish Vanevera reading. And that will be included in the exam. And it is, if I'm not wrong, it's the last reading that will be included in the exam. Today or tomorrow, I don't promise for today, but tomorrow I'm going to put an exam review sheet online at Moodle. So in that review sheet, you can actually find, all the key topics and some sample questions and stuff like that. So next week, then, we're finishing ideas in the international system. Okay. Today, I'm actually going to talk about the Russet reading. You had an assignment, and in the assignment, you were supposed to pick one among the three readings, and one of them was Russet. Russet talks about a very controversial issue in international relations, and a very controversial issue in the international system, related to the international system. And that is about how whether democracies go and fight with one another. Now, with you, I looked at how wars affect regime types and how regime types affect war from a historical perspective so far. I told you about how absolute monarchies rose, and then once they arise, how they affect participation, the nobles and the courts, the estates, the parliaments. So that was a more historical approach. But I did not talk to you about a more theoretical approach on how regime type affects wars and thus the international system. Okay, that's what I'm going to do for half an hour today, and then I'm hopefully, or maybe more, and then I'm going to start talking about ideas today. So, who did Russet in the assignment? Okay, 2 people. Now, probably you will see if you did too? Okay, all right. So now you will probably see if you actually took the points that were really the gist of the argument in democratic peace. But before that, guys, I want you to learn the name, okay? Immanuel Kant is the person who first came up with the idea, the philosopher who came up with the idea that a perpetual peace can actually be possible in the international system. What's perpetual? In English? Forever? Okay, peace forever. A very romantic approach to peace. What? Continues, okay, eternal. So you can just think of peace in this context as countries not going to war with one another. It is, I kind of laughed at the idea of the romanticness of perpetual peace, but at the same time, it's very important that someone, when there are very few democracies, someone comes up with the idea of perpetual peace and relate it to regime type, okay? So imagine by the end of 1700s, how many democracies are there? 1. Our usual suspect, Britain. Even, haven't I told you last week that even in Britain, suffrage is not universal until after the First World War? So we're talking about a world that really does not have democracies yet. And it doesn't really have a good definition of democracy either. It's quite a utopia to talk about democracy at the time. So this guy, Immanuel Kant, he starts looking at how the system works, okay? How regimes work. And he decides that once a war is initiated, who benefits from the war? So in other words, he's looking at the interest groups that will benefit from a war. And usually it is the elite, the political elite, that benefit from a war. So since it is solely the political elite that benefit from war, the masses, the people, the ordinary people, common people, actually are the ones that die. We have emphasized population loss, economic loss, remember? But do you think that at the time it was the elite that lost its economic status as a result of war? Not really. So at the time that Immanuel Kant is writing on this, we're actually seeing that it is the common people that are dying and that are actually losing as a result of taxation and their land and all that. So it's the masses that bear the costs of war. Okay, and why is that important? He decides, Immanuel Kant decides that if the masses could be included in decision making more, if the participation was more common in countries, don't ever forget that he's writing at a time that is, quite a utopia. So he imagines if everyone could participate, then people would not let their leaders go to wars. Remember last week I told you that we looked at the American elections and the Democrat Party was losing as a result of Vietnam War. So we actually saw that democracies were quite affected. The leaders of democracies were voted out as a result of wars, especially wars that they lose or wars that do not really bring too much on the table. Yeah.
Don't today's so-called democracies also lack in many aspects?
Absolutely. I am going to get to that. Let's just finish this first and now we will discuss what democracy is. Okay? What the real meaning of democracy is and if there are democracies in the world today. That is a discussion. So his argument, Immanuel Kant's argument, is quite inspiring for international relations scholars because many centuries ago, he actually comes up with the idea that if all countries in the world made participation more available, so if political participation was or would become a norm in the world, then these countries would not fight eventually. And the reason for that is the masses that bear the costs of wars would not let the leader go to a war. Okay, so he's sitting at his desk and he's thinking at the time, in a very unimaginable time, he's thinking, okay, how can we stop wars? Because he believes that wars are the most important problematic in the world system, in the international system. So he decides that if we could spread democracy, then we could have a chance for a peaceful or a perpetual peace, a peaceful world. Okay, yeah.
Actually, there was a person prior to Kant. He offered to pick up a neutral city-state or state, and he gave the example of Venice, and he said the first person should be the Pope and the second person should be the Ottoman representative. So Ottomans should be included, so that it will be an international institution that everything will be discussed and wars will be prevented and peaceful.
The nice thing with Kant's idea, personally, I think that the nice thing about his idea is he does not point to states that can, that can achieve this utopia. He actually believes that if all countries in the system, so in that sense, guys, his idea is quite systemic. He's looking at the whole system. He's not only looking at one region, he's actually talking about the whole international system. So his analysis is in systemic level. Okay, so he says if that was possible, then we could argue that all states would live in peace. Okay, and how does he do that? Now, I want you to think that these philosophers at the time are looking at the history of the international system. Remember the historical background we looked at? It was plagued with wars. And in none of the cases, there were two democracies, okay? So the concept of democracy was quite alien to these people, to Europe and to the world in general, okay? So that is Immanuel Kant's idea, and that idea will be followed up by people like Woodrow Wilson. We mentioned Woodrow Wilson, right, as the President of the United States that came up with the, actually supported the establishment of League of Nations. And it was quite an unsuccessful attempt, but at the same time, it was important that, by 1918, there were more states that actually talked about democracy. And then by the end of the Second World War, there were more states that discussed democracy. And then today, we have even more. We have the discussions of what will happen in Libya. We have the discussions of Iraq. Is Iraq going to become, or is Iraq a democracy? Or is it going to become a democracy? Will there be a civil war, communal strife? All these questions follow after the initiation of the idea that democracy is a good thing, okay? So with the idea that, okay, all states should be democratic so that we can stop wars, all the other ideas will follow, okay? So I want to get into, okay, so we're looking at three hypotheses, okay? The first one, we're looking at two hypotheses. The first one is, if the public is pacific, pacific means peaceful, not fighting, okay? If the public is pacific, then the war will be less likely to get included, to get involved. The country will be less likely to be involved in a conflict, okay? I only slept for 3 hours last night because I was, traveling back to Turkey, so I might be a little slow today, and I might say things wrongly. Just be aware, okay? Okay. I'm catching myself after a while when I make the mistake. So the greater the political power of the public, the less likely a state becomes involved in a war. So it looks like he's talking about one country, but in fact, he says, Immanuel Kant says, if every country in the system does that, behave in this way, then there will be perpetual peace. Okay? So he's not only talking about one country, he's talking about the whole system. Now, the second hypothesis is what we call the democratic peace proposition, okay? So the first proposition that we learned is perpetual peace, which is different than democratic peace. I'm emphasizing this because the common mistake done is to think that what Immanuel Kant is saying is the same thing as the democratic peace scholars. Now, there is a large literature on democratic peace. And in democratic peace literature, the hypothesis is different. That's why I said there are two hypotheses. So the second hypothesis, the democratic peace hypothesis, is two countries, if they are democracies, two countries will not fight against one another. That means, in the first hypothesis, if you were a democracy, I was a democracy, if all of us were democracies, the world would be an eternally peaceful place. The second hypothesis is, if I was a democracy, and if you were a democracy, we would not fight with one another. So the second hypothesis does not cover all of you, okay? It is dyadic, meaning it includes two states. So democratic peace hypothesis does not argue that the whole place will be peaceful when democracy comes. It only argues that two states that are democracies do not fight against one another. It does not argue that I should try to force you into being a democracy so that we won't fight. But there are people, and students, sometimes misunderstand it that way. That's why I'm warning you. Spreading democracy, making you democracy forcefully is not what the democratic peace scholars that are liberal international relations scholars argue, okay? So do you see the difference? In the idea of perpetual peace, we're talking about a systemic, utopic observation. When one country is democratic, that country becomes more peaceful. That's the observation. And if democracy spreads to all countries, the whole system will be peaceful. Well, the democratic peace guys say something different. Democratic peace guys say, democracies are not more peaceful. So there is a very basic difference between the idea of perpetual peace and the idea of democratic peace. Okay, hold on, let me finish. So democracies then won't fight, two democracies won't fight with one another, but a democracy will fight. So if Yahya is a non-democracy, you're authoritarian, and I'm a democracy, I can fight with you. So the observation is that democracies are not necessarily peaceful. They do fight with non-democracies. Okay? So guys, so far I talked about two different hypotheses. The first hypothesis was perpetual peace, and the logic behind it, the theoretical framework behind it was masses will not want to fight because they lose. It's the masses that bear the cost of war. That's the theoretical underpinning of the perpetual peace hypothesis. Now, in the case of democratic peace, there are many different theoretical underpinnings. I'll give you two today. The first one is in the slide. Peaceful norms that democracies actually use within the country will make conflict resolution more likely. In other words, leaders in a democracy are socialized in such a way that in their domestic environment that they will not want conflict. They won't try to solve a problem through conflict. Do you have sisters, brothers? No? Anyone with siblings? Okay, I have a brother and a sister. And as I grew up, we would constantly fight. And when I say fight, I mean fight. Yes, I mean serious fight. But my brother, because he was he's older, he's the oldest of three of us, of course it would be our brother that would mostly beat us up. then it would be a draw between my sister and me. Why? Because, well, she's about 4 years older than I am, but at the same time, I think I was more interested in martial arts than she was. So it was usually a tie between my sister and I. And my parents were working. My mom was working and my dad was working, and it was most of us, the three of us. So it was, from that perspective, not a democratic environment. So in that domestic environment, I actually learned that problems can easily be solved through force. Now, this explanation says, in a different setting, in other words, my domestic environment was an authoritarian domestic environment from that perspective, okay? But if it was a democratic environment, is there anyone who would argue that their domestic environment with the siblings was different than mine? Everyone had to fight, okay. Maybe that's why, you know, Turkey's struggling for democracy. Well, actually, I might be joking, but maybe not. From the perspective of this theory, socialization is extremely important. So the way I was socialized actually says a lot about the kind of leader I will be if I ever become, you know, the prime minister or the president of the country. That's not good news, because in my socialization process, I actually have not been to a very democratic environment. Okay, take the jokes, you know, take all the jokes away. What I think we should get from this argument is that democratic leaders usually socialized in settings where conflict is resolved in a more peaceful way, will want to do that for the international relations of the country as well. So the foreign policy, because the socialization of the country is, of the leaders in the country is in a democratic environment, the country's dealings with other countries in the future will be more peaceful, okay? So the whole story is about how you are socialized since your early, you know, childhood environments, and generalized to all people, okay? Not only the leaders, but all people, or most people. So the constraint is internally generated. You, yourself, stop yourself from solving the conflict in a conflictual way. So in my case, miraculously, I became a professor, and I learned how to solve problems in a more peaceful way. Well, I am probably contradicting my own experiences in my childhood, but the argument is that socialization throughout your life is quite important, okay? What might have been going on with me is maybe after this early socialization of conflict and solving problems through conflict, maybe I went to school and I learned to socialize in a different way. Or maybe, you know, it was not me, but my sister. If they hear this, they will be really upset. My sister and my brother were the problem. So we don't know. But what we know is socialization is a long process, and the constraint is internal. So in my case, if I have a problem with Akbel, if I immediately decide to actually beat you with this, then that actually shows that I'm not using any internal constraint because I didn't learn to use that. But if I go to her and I say, Akbel, what happened? Why can't we get along? And I'm exaggerating it. So that would actually show that I want to solve the problem through negotiation and through peaceful techniques. Okay? So that's different. Yes?
So how come then Kant can be so much pro-democrat? Because the environment of the socialization period is important in shaping one's identity and beliefs and principles.
Yeah.
So he was living in the heart of Prussia, and Prussia
Yeah.
was the whole war machine.
Yes, that's why this argument is very different than Kant's argument. Kant's argument is quite rational. He looks at costs and benefits, doesn't he? He says the masses bear the costs of conflict. So the masses, ordinary people, will not want to go to war. So if you actually let masses participate, they're not going to want war. That is a completely different theoretical argument than this argument that I just showed you. That's why in this class, I want everyone to understand that Kant's argument of perpetual peace is not the same as what they call the democratic peace argument. Okay? They're different. Democratic peace guys do not necessarily believe that democracies are peaceful, like I said. In Kant's argument, democracies are supposed to be peaceful because the masses will be pacific. Because why would they want something that will be too costly for them? Okay? They're very different arguments. So in this argument, we're actually talking about two democracies, Hussein and I. We actually believe that it's possible to solve a conflict from a peaceful, using peaceful techniques, okay? So what do? We actually decide to talk to each other. We have a problem, and the problem is, I would really like it if I could get, let me see, I'll find a realistic example. Okay, you have some really precious stones in your territory, and I would really want, a part of it. But at the same time, you're a democracy and I'm a democracy, and let's just forget everything about my sister and my brother, and let's just assume that I was socialized in an extremely democratic environment. So in that situation, I decide that the best thing to do is not to actually invade your country, but come to you and say, well, Hussein, you have these stones that I really need for my economy, these precious diamonds that you really need for my economy. So in this case, I don't want to fight. What do you offer? What would you offer to me? Trade negotiations. Okay. So you could say, and in this situation, okay, if you're wondering the power situation, I'm more powerful. Okay? And so Hussein is like, okay, you are more powerful, but in the meantime, you have things that I want as well. So let's just negotiate. Let's just do something to negotiate. It doesn't have to be trade negotiations. Could be something else as well. Okay? So we decide to solve the conflict from a peaceful perspective. Okay? So that actually means that our socialization processes, the norms that we have created as democracies, prevent us from getting into a conflict. Let's just assume that Orkun has precious stones and Orkun is not a democracy. Okay? And I am a democracy. In a situation like this theoretical underpinning would say, even if I approach him with, the perspective of conflict resolution, even if I want to negotiate with Orkun, he might, because he does not have the same culture, he might actually say, I'm not giving you anything. Come and try to invade me. Do whatever you want. Come. Can you give the example of, any example from current international affairs? There are so many. Okay, so then the argument says, the argument would posit that if your country is an authoritarian country, then you will be more likely, because you haven't been socialized in negotiation or conflict resolution strategies, you might actually consider the option of war before I do. In my case, I'm going to consider war as a later option, okay? So when we are both democracies, as in the example of Hussein and I, then the situation is different than having Orkun and me, him an authoritarian state, and me a democratic state. So in that situation, guys, war is more likely than the first situation. That's what the democratic peace scholars mean. And Russet also explains this in his article. It means two democracies will be less likely to fight. But once again, it doesn't say if there is one authoritarian state and one democracy, the democracy should go to that state and spread democracy. That is not the argument. And I think this is one of the most misunderstood topics in international relations, okay? So that's not what democratic peace is about. So I have then two explanations. I told you that I have two explanations for the same hypothesis. Remember my horrible shoe situation, the feet situation? Okay. So the uncomfortable shoes was one explanation. Gravity was another explanation, right? With gravity, as years go by, the feet get deformed. Did we have other explanations? Uncomfortable shoes was one. Okay, the third explanation was genetics. So when we have one observation, one hypothesis as a result of that observation, you can have many different explanations, okay? And these explanations get together to form a theory. Now, in this case, for democratic peace proposition, that's also an observation, okay? You know what they do? They actually, okay, I don't have a board marker, so I'm just going to explain it to you. IR scholars get together many years ago, and they decide that they would like to form a database where they see which countries are democracies and which countries fight. So what they do is, I want you to imagine it this way. Think of an Excel sheet, and in that Excel sheet, you know what? I'm not going to do it this way. Let's take a break for 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, I'll start. I'm not going to have anyone come late. So 5-minute break. I'll get a board marker. Okay? Okay.